My name is Julia Coakley, Head of Operations, and on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, which is being delivered by Innovation Group. Before I introduce our panellists, I ask that during this webinar, you ensure your camera and microphone is off. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Your question will be answered during the session and at the end of the session. And if we don't get a chance to answer your questions, these will be put to the panellists post-event. This presentation is accredited for CPD points if relevant to your ongoing professional development, and the video will be available on our website and uploaded to our MGAA YouTube channel. Finally, please take time to respond to our Survey Monkey. We do very much value your feedback on these events, which does let us deliver the best quality events to our membership. So today's webinar, The Widening Skill Gap and the Changes to the Modern Way of Working, is being delivered by Innovation Group, and I'd like to introduce Gary de Groot, Business Development Director, Rob Angus, Head of Specialist Services, and Joe Doyle, Head of HR. So Gary, if I might hand over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Julia, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just do some very quick introductions of the panel. So I'm Gary de Groot, Sales and Marketing Director at Innovation Group. Worked in insurance for close to 15 years now, always within the claims industry, and I'll be today's host. Joe, I'll push over to you.
Thanks, Gary. I'm Joe Doyle. I'm Head of HR Innovation Group. I've worked in HR for over 11 years in various different industries with multinational clients, and today's topic is really important to me, as people are.
Thanks, Joe. Rob Angus, we'll go to you.
Hi there. My name's Rob Angus. I've been in the subsidence industry for the past 24 years now in various guises, from one end to the other. I'm currently in charge of specialist services for Innovation Group.
Thanks, Rob. Gary Pike.
Hi, I'm Gary Pike, the owner and founder of International. We're an executive search firm specialising predominantly in claims, but across the wider insurance market, and I've been doing it for a long time.
Thanks, Gary. And finally, Jess.
Yeah, my name's Jessica Power. I work for International as a senior consultant. We're doing this for 6 years now, working on different level roles across the insurance and claims market, both UK and international.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jess. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited to speak about this topic today, a topic that's been hot in the industry press and on LinkedIn over the last few years. I'm sure you've seen many articles shared within your LinkedIn community about this topic that we want to discuss. And the reality is that we are facing a bit of a problem here. We'll call it a crisis yet. We'll get some enlightenment on that from the panel as we go through. So with baby boomers set to retire over the next 10 years and new generations entering into the workforce, relatively concerning that only 4% of millennials are interested in working in insurance. It's not seen as an attractive profession as it once was, and this has created an issue for the whole of the industry, with particular specialities for us in claims looking at loss adjusting, surveying and engineering, which are all really relevant for us. We need to be concerned about an ageing demographic and how we can ensure this doesn't become an even bigger issue over the next 10 years, where we're going to cultivate that next generation of talented technical people from. So today we're going to discuss the widening skills gap in the industry, assess just how big an issue we think that is, and talk about how we can attract talented people to insurance and what we need to do as employers to help them and provide the correct environment for them to learn, flourish, and ultimately become the leaders of the future. So very, very interesting topic. Got some great speakers, both from the insurance and recruitment industries today. So without further ado, let's kick off. So guys, I think the first question for me is, how concerned should we be about this widening skills gap as it's titled? And where particularly are we seeing areas of concern from your own individual perspective? And actually, Gary, I'm probably going to come to you first, because I think a really interesting perspective around how easy or difficult you're finding placement of claims specialists at technical levels and where some of those gaps are arising from.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a question, and that's why the whole purpose of this seminar across the industry, there is just a shortage of technical claims specialists across the market, particularly in property related. I think with the whole particularly with the pandemic and the shift in sort of claims in certain areas, and there's been a big demand, particularly property related. And you're right, there is a real gulf and a gap of more experienced people. A lot of them are close to retiring, and what you said at the beginning, there is a shortage of talent coming into the market. I think the question is how not just us as recruiters, because we work on behalf of clients, but how do clients make it more attractive as a proposition or as a career? And I've got 4 kids myself all working, and it's not a topic of, we don't talk about the insurance market. I talk about what I do, and it generally doesn't interest them. But it's the perception, because as we all know, once people get into the market, it's an interest and it's an attractive business. I think one of the things, particularly we'll come on to it in a moment, with technology, sort of certain generation are very interested in technology, and I think the days of where people stay with one company for their career, this is great and very admirable, but those days are changing. The younger generation look for, what can I learn, what can I do, how can I sort of develop? So I think it's, how do you make it more attractive? I think that comes from the entry level of how do you market your business and your brand. Then we come on to how do you retain that talent. But then I think one of the things I know we're going to come on to is how do we develop and train people coming into the market? Because one of the challenges talking to people out in the market, particularly with remote working, is we've all learned, depending on what stage you're at here, by sitting with people in meetings or observing them in an office environment. I think that is the challenge with how do you train and how do you develop it. And I'm waffling on a bit here, but I think that is the challenge. How do you make, I'm not saying loss adjusting per se, but a technical area interesting to graduates or school leavers who are looking for a career, because often they don't know what they want to do. And then it's like, how do you attract them? And then what are the different opportunities you can give them? Because they might want to try something, and then they might be interested as a business, but not that particular area. So I think the clients that we work with where there's more opportunities in just one particular niche seem to be the ones that have more opportunities of attracting people. I think that's one of the key things,
I think it's spot on, Gary. A lot of topics that we'll delve into in a bit more detail as we go through as well. But I think, we've all sort of gone through this joke, haven't we, when people ask, how did you get into insurance? And it was never something that you put down on your school report when you were 8 years old. So I want to grow up to be an insurance salesperson or claims handler. It was always, I fell into it, wasn't it? Is the cliche. So almost need to remove that stigma of it being quite a boring industry to work in, because actually it isn't, but it's got a reputation for being quite bland, quite boring, probably not as diverse or multicultural or technology driven as it is as well. And there's work that everyone needs to do to reframe that sort of perception, I guess. Rob, I mean, you run a technical team of technical leaders and senior people, and I'm sure that this is very relevant to you. Some of the things that Gary touched on around aging workforce is something you're seeing, and no doubt struggling to find some good people to backfill roles that are becoming available.
Yeah, very much. And it's not just the insurance sector for my area either. A lot of the guys that I work with, I manage a soils laboratory and a roots laboratory, a team of arboriculturalists, and there's all sorts of individual specialisms that add to the insurance industry market, but don't necessarily get into it because of insurance. To come back on one of the things you were saying, Gary, you find yourself when you work insurance, you have a conversation with your mates down the pub and they ask you what you do for a living, and you struggle to be able to articulate what it is you do, because unlike a fireman or a nurse or something, people don't really know what's involved in insurance work as they're growing up and they're going through college. It's all sort of untapped potential there. I think it's a question of piquing people's interests. And I think one thing that's come across really clear just from what you've said is what we're going to do is going to have to be very different to what we've done in the past. There's a big adaptation to be had here to find out how the youth today look at employment and what it is that they need from it. I think we do a lot about creating role profiles and things on how we want the relationship to go. but I think we need to pay a little bit more attention on what the employee's role profile is, what they're looking for from this particular opportunity, and try and meet some of those objectives as much as meeting our own. So definitely a bit of a halfway house there, I think.
No, I'm spot on, Rob, and I always think back to this because, I fell into insurance the same as everyone did. And when I graduated in 2007, part of the reason that I was happy to work in insurance is because I got to work in London, in the city, in a really vibrant atmosphere that was great for socialising. Now, a lot of that has been removed over the last few years as well. And so you're almost taking out an additional benefit of why a lot of people quite enjoyed working, whether it was an office environment, doesn't have to be London, big cities, big office environments, real team ethic. A lot of that, again, has been removed because of the pandemic we've been through. So it's taken one of the draws of the industry away there as well, I guess. Joe, you're sort of our head of HR at Innovation Group, obviously ultimately responsible for our recruitment push. I'm sure this is something that's very relevant to what you see day in, day out.
Yeah, I mean, again, some of the points that Gary said and Rob's mentioned on is attracting that young talent coming in, and how do we make it more visible. And I think there's definitely more work that maybe could be done with colleges and universities to publicise it, because as you say, when you're at school and you go through that career path, it's not something someone says to you, oh, have you thought about insurance? So how do we raise that profile? And it's probably working with the local schools and universities to raise it a little bit more, to get our voices out there with our clients, to say, this is a career and this is what it looks like. And I think for us, there's been some amazing success stories where people have started at those levels and then moved into different avenues. As Rob said, there's so many specialisms that we've got within innovation. It's how do we expose that and share that with our candidates so they can see what's in it for them. Because as Gary said, people aren't now looking for a job for life. They tend to be in it for 3 to 4 years, some of them as 2, get as much out of it and move on. But actually, can we harness that within our company to say, well, yeah, you come in, you've got those 2 years, and this is how we can move you on into another role. So they're still getting that exposure. We're still keeping it fresh and entertaining for them, but we're keeping them within innovation, so we're not losing that talent and we're managing to retain them. So I think some of those things are really important, and we've done quite a lot at Innovation Group, and Rob's been key to this and working on all of the things we've always done, where you sat next to the person in the office, you understand it and you learn it, to try and to structure it more so we can present that to our candidates and our graduates to say, this is what we're doing, because we don't have those office environments anymore with COVID. We have got the remote working, and it's getting that blend right of online and face-to-face, which I think are all massive topics to talk through.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, but you hear a lot, don't you, about the osmosis effect, and we all have it. You sit next to someone in the office that's more experienced than you, and you pick their brains, and that does become inevitably more difficult when you're only communicating over Teams. It feels like a formality to phone someone or message them on Teams as opposed to speak to them when they sit next to you. And so that does create, and I think if you look at the two sides here, we talked about the baby boomers and an aging demographic around technical expertise. Your ideal situation would be to replace that internally and cultivate your own people, but that becomes even more challenging because we are all remote based at the moment, and how that works going forward, the expectations of young employees as well. So you've almost got a perfect storm of aging workforce but don't necessarily have the people to bring in behind it, or the training facilities that we traditionally had, because we've lost that in-house sitting next to each other effect we've always had in place.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to planning, doesn't it? And that's the main thing for organisation to do, is understand that, because we say ageing workforce, but as we know, there's no retirement age. So it's having those honest conversations with people to say, what are you thinking about doing? And we've got a great example in innovation ourselves, where, someone's looking to retire, but we're talking to them about, okay, well, what does that look like? Could you do 2 to 3 days, so we can still harness their knowledge and train someone alongside them? So it's trying to use those bits to help it work. But as you say, with Teams, it does feel a bit more formal when you're phoning someone to ask a question and you feel like maybe it's a silly question, whereas if you're in the office, you might not feel that. So how do we break down those barriers a bit internally and wider? hopefully with COVID we will start to interact more face to face with restrictions lifting, but it won't be the same as it was previously. And we've got we've just to say we've got 4 generations with it, 4 different generations in the workforce, and everybody's got different wants and needs.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's so important, whether it's structured or unstructured, to have some sort of coaching and mentoring process. And I think the more structured, just from feedback, talking to people in the market, probably the better. And I think the challenge now, some of that will have to be online remote training access as opposed to when you're in an office. But obviously when you are together, it probably accentuates the importance of what you do when you're together. I noticed but again, I'm sure we've all been back to meetings. I was in London last week on a Monday and it was just so quiet. I was talking to some of the preps and the Starbucks coffee people, and they said, like, Mondays and Fridays are just dead, but the Tuesdays to Thursday is absolutely rammed, almost back to normal.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're finding, Gary, but I'm finding it really hard to get slots in people's diaries to meet face to face, because when they're in London, it doesn't have to be London or wherever, they're absolutely back to back. So I think it's you have to think differently and plan and structure your day, and also your coaching and mentoring around that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Jess, just finally come to you. So, I mean, you're placing candidates regularly. Is that becoming more challenging in certain areas, as Gary alluded to at the start? Have we now got an employees market, I guess, in some of those areas because of the shortage of potential candidates there too?
Yeah, there's definitely, in particular in certain areas, like we said, the more the technical side of things. When you're going more kind of sales and operations, there tends to be a wider pool. But I think, not to keep repeating, but what everybody's said is absolutely correct in the sense that it's trying to get through to the younger generations. And for example, I was just thinking as you were talking that I used to work for a company that ran graduate exhibitions across the country. And thinking back, it's quite interesting because there was really limited insurance companies that would present and be present within these not just the exhibitions, but the online presence that they used to push forward as well. So it's not being communicated as well as potentially it could be to the younger generations, the school leavers, people leaving college, universities and things like that. And I think that's probably where there is a kind of, I suppose, a gap that could be filled. There's a great opportunity there for companies to approach younger individuals to ensure that talent comes through. I think that's the key thing, because it's fantastic that people are a bit more fluid and flexible later on in life in terms of retirement and things like that. But ultimately, at one point, they will retire. So we do need to make sure that we're focusing as well on bringing new talent in and helping them develop, engaging with them, and making sure that it's, like we said, it's interesting for them. It's not pigeonholing them. There's opportunity across the business. And I think that would be very well received, because it's purely a sense that they might not be aware of the insurance market. That's what it is. And like you said, we don't all kind of, when I grow up I want to be in insurance. I wasn't thinking that when I was, now I'm a recruiter. I didn't think that when I was younger. But I think once you work within the industry, you notice the opportunity that's there, the types of people, the leadership that's there, the expertise, the knowledge, and it's a great opportunity for young people. They just need to, I suppose, be exposed to it, really.
Oh, and Jess, I'm going to come back to you to touch on one of the points that you started skipping through the agenda slightly. So what is the new, whether it's a graduate, school leaver, or even someone new to the industry, forget, having just graduated, what are these people looking for from prospective employers or when they're choosing their careers? Because I get a feeling that it's very different from when I left university and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. This is a very different generation, a different moral compass, different ideas about the world and career paths, etc. So what do you see from those prospective candidates and what they're looking for from their first employment? Is it money focused or is it much broader than that?
It's interesting that question, because in all honesty, they don't know, a lot of them. There is this real kind of, I think because there's so much opportunity as well nowadays, there's so many different avenues people can take, that actually when I was growing up, it was kind of, you go down these routes and you go to university, you do your degree and you do something relevant to your degree. That's not the case anymore. And I think probably there's such a wider opportunity for young people that it's probably quite daunting. But having said that, the people that I have spoken to, it's companies that are quite innovative or forward thinking, with a longer term opportunity for development. So if they can go in and start at the bottom and learn the ropes, like we all have to, but there's opportunity for them to progress, and not just within that particular area, but if there's opportunity for them to explore within the business. So it's giving them options, opportunity, progression elements. Some will be very money focused, yes. Some people just are quite outright with me, it's about the money for the job, which is fair enough, that's up to them. And that typically those people are more kind of, we put those more into the kind of sales and development type people, because that works very well with their personality. But I think that it's, like I said, I think it's just the sheer scope to it. People don't know what they want to do. So it's just about, like we touched on earlier, communicating it, making sure that they're aware of opportunity, and just engaging with them and helping them see.
And understanding them as well. I
Exactly.
think that's one of the things, you can't pigeonhole people. People have their own kind of strengths, their own interests, their own ideas on where their career path's going to go. I think the strength of a manager comes in very useful here. You've got to get to know your staff. The idea of a staff member being a number, that should be confined to the past and a long time ago as well. But you get to understand individuals' strengths, things that they're particularly good at, things that they're particularly interested in. And then you have a look around your business, and the innovation group's quite wide like that. We've got a few different paths to go down. We've had some really good success over the past 2 years in taking people out of one department and plugging them in completely somewhere different, because that's where their interest lies. One guy in particular came in as a claims partner. He's now working on the change team in IT. And he's been through various other different places as well to get there. And this is where we've kind of hung our hat on our future attempts at bridging this gap, is to take people and develop them in-house. I think that the advantages of in-house development are many, but one of the most important things is you know that person. It's almost like you've had a 2 or 3 year interview with them, and you've found out all their characteristics and everything else about it, and you can make better decisions on where people might fit, where they might be able to flourish going forward. We've got some people in the business that's been here 17, 18 years, starting off right on the ground floor and now in quite senior positions, just through allowing them to grow and allowing them to find their own path.
Rob, I'm going to put a really difficult and perhaps unfair question to you as well. Yeah, we mentioned at the start that workers are probably more transient now. 3 to 4 year stints are quite common. Before they move on, they look for something else.
Yeah.
Does that inhibit or stop employers from having the correct development programs because they feel like they don't get the long-term benefits out of that? Or is that just something that is a consequence of a process that you have to have in place?
You've probably got a point at the start there, but to quote Henry Ford's famous thing, the only thing worse than not training your staff is not training them, having them stay, you know?
Yeah.
You can't go down that route, because what you're almost doing is you're saying to this person that, no, we're not going to invest in you because you'd probably just run away with the information. You've got to have the trust. And I think that's where the younger people coming into a workplace, that's what they're looking for. They're tired of the same old promises, you know, just work hard for 20 years and something good might happen. We've got to create a path, an honest path that we are committed to providing for them, and to work with them to help them get what they need out of a job without having to change jobs to get it.
Yeah.
It's that understanding. It gets right back down to a personal level for me.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, just something that you mentioned that I think is really relevant as well is, you know, and this is not a new phenomenon. You know, when you leave school or you graduate, you don't know what you want to do. You know, you tend to think there are only about 10 jobs out there. You know, you're a lawyer, you're a teacher, you're a doctor, you're a tradesman of some sort, or you work in an office, and that all gets grouped in together. And there's not necessarily understanding of all the different nuances. Gary, I'm going to come to you. You know, what sort of industries are attracting the best young candidates that you see coming through recruitment? Are they looking at tech businesses? Do they want to work for Googles and the YouTubes, as that's the sort of real premium businesses that are out there now from a world perspective?
It's a good question. With the whole growth in particularly the insurtech market, I suppose it depends on your definition of insurtech. There's startup insurtech, there's insurance companies that have technology, claims management, but that is increasingly a route. I suppose the areas that sort of tap into where we work, you know, insurance is a huge market. Within that, you know, claims is a huge area, but within claims, the technology piece is an area that's a huge investment, and we do a bit of work with some of the insurtechs, and a lot of them, probably 80% of the people don't have an insurance background. They're coming in as a graduate entry. It's only when you get into particular areas like claims, for example. I won't say who, but there's certain clients that we work with in sort of the MGA space. It's only when you get to a certain size or scale that you need sort of a director of claims or a head of claims. But sort of up until that point, it's very technology driven, and I think those are the areas where a lot of sort of grads, we talk to them about other opportunities, but then they see an insurtech, and a lot of insurtechs that I've been talking to, this is more on a global basis now, but they've started from day one. We are remote from day one.
Yeah.
And so they are, this is on a global basis. They're doing a bit of work there. They're recruiting not just out the UK, but they're recruiting, across the globe. So I think the technology piece, it's not for everybody. I think the other area where I think what we've talked about before is where there's just opportunities, and I think it's how it's then, I'm going off a slight tangent, it's the perception of that business and the brand in it, and is that reinforced by the leaders within that business? Because I think one of the things maybe we'll come on to in a minute is you can have what on perception is a great brand, they attract people into it, but if that's then not, like Rob was saying, reinforced with the leaders and the managers within that, they can initially attract people, but then they might lose those people because it's not what their perception. So I think technology related, but also coming back to the areas where it's not particularly to an insurer, an NJ or a broker. I think it's more about that business and perhaps the perception and some of the online marketing and media. I think Joe mentioned earlier, I've seen some companies, I don't know about the innovation group, I'm sure you have, but where you have an interview with a grad that you've employed 12 months down the line, very open. This is what it's like to be in the business. This is the training, that type of thing. There's social media. It's huge, isn't it? The opportunities out there. And I suppose it's picking the right element to sort of attract them people into your business.
Yeah, and as you say, deliver on promises. It's easy enough to put a good picture out there to attract people in, but if you sort of destroy that picture within the first couple of months, there's no longevity there. Yeah. If you're not going to do it, don't promise it. That's easy.
I think that, so I just jump in. The recruitment process, I don't know if we're going to that level, it is so important. That the first person that engages with that, whether it's a graduate or whoever, it's just so important. That's that first impression. Then if they're active in the market, they'll be talking to a whole range of different organisations. So it is important how your business and the role is portrayed, and some clarity quite early on, because you may miss out. That a company may miss out on some really good people because the first interaction isn't necessarily a good one.
Yeah. Joe, just to you on this. Yeah, you speak to a lot of candidates here. I would be interested to get your perspective on the candidates that you speak to and what they're asking from us when they're potentially looking to work with us going forward.
So it's interesting because all of the things that Gary was really saying there definitely resonates. I think it's changed. It's a two-way process. They are assessing us much as we're assessing them, and they want to understand how they can fit and how they resonate with the company and the culture and what they can get out of their opportunity with us. So it's definitely, I think, before, where maybe I was younger in school, it was a one-way process. It was me selling myself to why they should have me, and I think that's really changed and turned now to be vice versa. They're assessing us to see how they fit, and as you say, the question I get asked a lot is, what do you like working about where you work, and what is it about the company that you like? And those are the really important questions for me, because I love it because every day is different in my role. I love the fact that it's quite, we're a fast-paced organisation, and I love the new challenges that come up. And I always share that with any candidate I would speak to, because and it's always a question that I get answered. So I think it's the same of things coming through. It's how we work, again, thinking about the market and the candidates coming in and the different generation, what's important to them. And I don't know whether Gary and Jessica, you find that, but for me, they're more technology focused, but a bit more about that flexibility within the workforce. Not everybody's now looking for that true 9 to 5. Some people are, some people aren't, but maybe where they can do it have a break, do something and pick it up and work. They're still completing all their hours, but they're doing it in a different fashion. And in some roles that works and in some that doesn't, obviously. But it's definitely something that I think is the way the market's changing slightly.
Joe, it's a really good point. Gary, I want to ask you this actually. So, I look at claims roles in particular. Now, they're relatively rigid, I would say, around timing. So it's a 9 to 5 job. Traditionally has been office-based for the most part. That's changing a little bit, but it's office-based. It's wearing, a suit or a shirt or whatever it may be, more formality in terms of dress. Are those things unattractive now to the new workforce? When I think about a friend that works for Google, they have no holiday allowance. They take whatever they want per year that they think is appropriate. They work whatever hours they want. They come in their slacks, dress how they want. They have no desks, it's sit where you want. This is our way of working, which is, relatively traditional. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but is that something that puts off potential candidates?
Yeah, it's interesting. I might get Jessica involved because I've got a wry smile because there's a couple of roles we filled recently, fairly senior sort of claims roles where pre-pandemic, those roles would have been 4 days based in an office environment, whereas now it's maybe 1 day in an office and 4 days out of the office. And that this company's made the decision that's how they're going forward. Some other companies that we deal with that, and I think this is the question in the market is, what is the future? How do we make that work but from a business point of view, this is what we need. We need these people together from an efficiency to make this business work, but from an employee's point of view, they're pushing back, well, we don't want to do that. And I was talking to someone last week. I think one of the challenges is, particularly with COVID, everyone's situation is different, but people have got used to not being in an office.
Yeah.
We talked sort of earlier that a lot of people have, for lots of the right reasons, haven't got kids, they've gone and bought a dog. They've got used to, if they've got kids, maybe being able to go on the school run. They haven't had the cost of travelling into commute, wherever it is. Now, all of a sudden, and rightly so, I personally think, there has to be a middle ground, but it's like, how far do you push that? How far where an employer may say, well, look, if you're forcing me to do that, I'm going to get a job elsewhere. Yeah. And I think that is the big question of people I talk to in the market and no one's actually got an answer to it yet. And I think it's still working through, isn't it, in terms of what do we do without putting off our current people, but also to attract people. The people I talked to, I think I mentioned earlier, sort of like 3 days in an office, 2 days out, depending on the role. A lot of roles prior to pandemic were remote working anyway.
Yes.
Now quite geared to some of the loss adjusting type roles. So they haven't particularly changed hugely, but I think that is the challenge. I haven't got the answer to it, and I think that's, companies, CEOs, business owners, that's what they're trying to work through right now in terms of what is that going to look like.
Yeah, and Gary, I agree with that. I mean, I've got a bit of a torn view on this, because everything that you said about, dropping your kids at school, taking back nearly 2 hours a day commuting for some people, the cost of that, I think, is fantastic. If I think about a younger person, very often lives with their parents, which is not the ideal environment for working from home. And also, Rob touched on individuality of these people. They want to be assessed on their own merits and their own skill sets and have an individual plan for succession that's tailored around them. I think you lose a bit of that individuality if you're not present within the office. I think you just become a number on a spreadsheet of productivity, as opposed to a personality and a character within the workforce, and that can get diluted if you're working from home. So I think there's a balance, and as you said, no one's got the answer yet, I don't think, have they? Jess, I mean, Gary mentioned you've got some insights around this. Be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so just coming back to kind of your question when you said, are they, the more traditional elements, is it attractive to people? It's interesting. I won't mention any names or anything like that, but there was somebody that I spoke to that recently had an interview with an insurtech business and was so blown away and very happy to see it, to be honest. That's probably the right word to use, that they were quite casually dressed, but they had tattoos. on show, and that's really unusual in the insurance market, as I'm sure you would all agree. That's not the norm. And the way that they were kind of, I suppose, talking about the business and the future of the kind of insurance market, it was more geared towards a modern way of thinking, not, you know, much less traditional than what the insurance market's used to, which I've no doubt will ruffle some feathers, understandably. I think it's finding a balance, isn't it, where you still got the ability to be, like you said, individual, show your personality, be who you want to be, you know, not necessarily have tattoos that would affect what you're doing and how you do your job, but at the same time it's that kind of level of looking respectful, presentable in front of clients, things like that. It's finding that balance, and I think most people understand work, you know, work is work, and there is a professional element to it. So it's about just finding the ground, as long as people are respectful, you know, and things like that, and how they present themselves. It shouldn't really be an issue. It shouldn't be something that's kind of considered new wave and modern in a market, I believe. But that's just my opinion. But I think that most people, the younger generations, would be more attracted to that just because of the generation that they've grown up in. It's a bit more kind of, it's less traditional in its setup, and I think that people are very attracted. Younger people, my generation, slightly older than the new waves coming through, probably lean. I'm just speaking for myself, but there's the kind of balance of traditional and modern way working, and then I think that the younger generations like the new kind of concept. But what you said is absolutely correct, Gary, in the sense that they want to feel like they're part of something. It's a brand new opportunity for them. They don't know what they're doing. They're going in blind, effectively, and having a mentor to help train, develop, and spend, and also make them feel special, give them the time, you know, and help them grow, learn, and develop. That's invaluable to them. I think a lot of younger people want that because they look up to people that do well. You know, that's just the way the world works. We all do. We all have somebody that we look up to. So I think by having that balance of being able to go into the office, spend the time, it almost investing in that person, isn't it, really, to help build, develop, and grow them. I think younger people will really appreciate that because it's a difficult thing to do in today's market where there's this flexibility of working.
Yeah, Gary's going to show us his tattoos now.
Not where I've got them. I'm only joking. So we have touched on this a little bit. I just want to deal with it specifically as well. So what do we need to do to attract good people to this industry? What do we need to change? Focusing on the businesses that you work with, Jess and Gary, Joe, Rob, thinking about the people that we employ, the people that we want to attract. What do we need to do to modernize the recruitment process and make our business as attractive as, you know, a technology company to these prospective employees? I'll go to Rob, you first.
I think we've got to be open and clear. Not just about the role, but about the culture in the company, full stop. What kind of company we are, not just what we're promising, but what we do as BAU, to give some evidence of the success that we've had, and give a clear indication of how things is going to go. You know, we're talking about that there's a lot of change in where people work and how people work, but there's going to have to be, there's the same amount of change in how we manage people as well. Especially for mental well-being for people working at home. You know, it's a different ball game from sitting beside somebody. So if we can get across at interview stage that, you know, we're not just looking for you to say, yes, you're coming to work for us. We're looking for you to come in to find you a place that fits, to allow you to develop, allow you to make changes within the company, and coach you all the way through that. Have somebody by your side to help you through it. You're almost selling a life to somebody. And when you think about it, you know, you're at work 8 hours a day. You are selling part of a life to somebody. That's going to be their be all and end all for those 8 hours. We've got to give them a little bit of comfort, a little bit of honesty, I think.
Yeah, it's almost, you know, you see the adverts for the Army and the RAF. It's a career lifestyle choice as much as anything else, isn't it? So it's a similar sort of mentality to that. Gary, come to you on that. What do we all need to be doing? You know, you've got an interesting perspective on this. You see what insurance companies, what claims management companies, what MGAs, what we all do wrong when we're trying to attract people. What do we need to fix? What do we need to be better at?
I think it's some things touched on earlier. We're focusing on sort of the younger generation. They're so transparent. They're on their phone. They want to see things quickly. I think you touched on, they want to see if they clicked on whatever company, is there an example very quickly on a video of what does this company do? What's the opportunity? Give me some examples. It's a bit like a Trustpilot type thing. They get bought. My youngest 22-year-old is on his phone all day long. I don't know half the things he's looking at, but they want to see things quickly. And I think that is one of the, particularly that generation, they need to be able, it's how you market and you brand that business, but then how do you get them to whether it's via LinkedIn or whatever marketing tools that you need. I think that's the key thing. And then once you've hooked them in, so to speak, it's then what's next, which we've sort of talked on. So what is the role? What's the opportunity? Who is the first person? I think the other thing we haven't quite touched on is the feedback we get. A lot of the roles we go out and proactively search and headhunt, and a lot of people aren't actively looking, but clearly we do talk to people that are actively looking. And I think the challenge is when you put an advert out there, or however you go to track it, I don't know what Joe's, you often get lots and lots of CVs coming through, some good people, but a whole mixture of people that just aren't completely relevant. I think one of the challenges is how do you deal with that? Because there may be someone really good in there, not quite right for the role that you've got today, but might be really good for something in the future. And if you haven't, I'm not saying you particularly, but if a company hasn't responded or engaged or acknowledged, and it's amazing the amount of times the feedback we get from candidates. We ask, what are you looking in the market? What have you looked at? Well, I applied for that. Now I sent the CV, got absolutely no response. And so if a role came up, say 3 months later, I think, well, I'm not going to respond to that. The last time I did it, So I think that is a challenge just across any recruitment industry where there's lots of candidates active. Is how do you physically, if you haven't got one person or groups of people, handle that? Because it's the volumes, Joe. I don't know what your thought is. If you're getting lots of CVs through, how do you actually personalize it to respond to people? So it's almost like your pipeline. If they're not right today, how do you engage them 6-12 months down the line?
And that's a really great question, Gary. And ultimately, yes, but sometimes we do get a high volume. It's getting, again, for us, addressing the right method for the role that we're trying to attract. So we know some roles we won't get on LinkedIn, but we know for the technical specialist roles, we more than likely could get them on LinkedIn. But there is the gaining permission once we've read through them. If they're not right for this role, but they're somebody we'd want to keep on there, it's just asking that permission and keeping them on in a talent pool for the future. But I do think there's more around that, again, that keeping that talent pool then actively engaged is something that probably still needs a little bit of work in the whole market, really. How do you keep those people up to date, and how do you keep them updated with maybe industry news or company news? And that's something that I've been speaking to our talent acquisition team, especially more in the tech space and other spaces, but how do we keep them updated and get like maybe a list together, a mailing list, and send them stuff? But it's what's relevant and what's applicable. And again, as we said at the very beginning, sometimes when you're young and new into a career, you don't know what you want, so signing up to those mailing lists might then really be a turn off for you. It might not be something that actually does keep you engaged. And I think it links in again to what Rob said. It's about understanding each individual throughout that process. And when you're speaking to someone, you might have in your mind that a role is home-based all the time, but you can really hear from them that they need that well-being, they need that, they like to be present in the office a couple of days a week. And do we have the flexibility as a company to be able to tailor that, or put them into an office and have them as a hybrid role rather than fully home-based? So I think recruitment is really changing at the moment, with it being a candidate market, with it being, quite an active market where they can pick and choose, and you are up against each other, and it's understanding how brand impacts that and making our story resonate with them. So we don't have on there we don't have on our website our success stories for people who've moved throughout their careers, but maybe it's something that actually is really important that we send to people as part of our process, so
I was just thinking that.
people.
I was just thinking that if we're going to talk about career progression that Rob touched on, actually evidencing it to potential candidates might be quite attractive as well. I mean, I always think for anyone that there's two things. That there is a salary, and that is, anyone that says that that's not important to them is probably telling a fib, because we work, people want to be compensated. I think even more so for those that have graduated over the last few years, with the significant amounts of student debt that they're saddled with as well. It's incumbent upon them. We've got rising house prices as well. It's not an easy environment to just say, that's irrelevant to me. But I always think if you can evidence that there is progression, then that shows, people just don't want to be boxed into this is the limit of my progression, because I think that's when they're going to start looking elsewhere as well. Jess as well, just for you, I think as well, quite importantly, is we spoke a lot about graduates, but actually some of what we're talking about is relevant for our existing workforce as well, of any age group. We live in a very different environment now, and we're talking about how we attract young people, but some of these disciplines, whether it's progression or feeling part of a culture of a business, is just as important for someone that's been working for you for 10, 12 years as it is to a new starter as well, right?
Completely, absolutely. And what's interesting, I was actually going to bring this point up because, we focused on younger generations, but actually I speak to a multitude, different level people every day, all day. And what's becoming very apparent in today's market, particularly with the kind of more established workers, people that kind of, maybe have been in the industry for a couple of few years, or all the way up to being in the industry for 20 years, when they're looking at other opportunities, for whatever reason that might be, the feedback I'm getting in the market is the job descriptions that are written are big blurb on the company, a generic blurb on what the company is and what they're like, but actually not much kind of in regards to key tangibles of what they're looking for in the candidate for that position, and what the day-to-day runnings will be of that particular role. Because I think that could also solve a little bit the issue where you get inundated with multiple CVs across. It's any business as well. If they get inundated with multiple CVs, it might be that the job descriptions need to be slightly tweaked, slightly more specific to kind of narrow down so you get relevant candidates approaching. And that just seems to be the biggest pet peeve at the moment of candidates in the market, is the fact that they're not clear on what the client's looking for in the job. So they're applying to lots of jobs that they're probably not quite relevant for, and they might not necessarily hear back, or it's a no, and they get, once they're looking, especially if they're active and they get multiple no's, it can knock the confidence a little bit, I think. But I think it's just the clarity, and what Rob said earlier, it's delivering on being honest, open and honest is really important to people in today's world. And even if, warts and all, if there's issues and you're honest with them, the right person will see that as an opportunity rather than a challenge. They will see it as, okay, this is really interesting. So this is the area where you're struggling with. I can help you. I can add value. And I think that's what it is. They want to feel like they're adding value, and they're doing something for the business that's productive, basically.
No, I completely agree. Thanks, Jess. I do agree with that strongly. We've had a really interesting question as well that I just want to put to you guys. So the question reads: language seems to be an issue, especially for people entering the sector from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who struggle to relate to people working in the industry. I guess some of the language that we probably use it today, in terms of some of the cliched words that are just business speak. How can people better speak to younger generations in the workplace and make the language that we use more inclusive? I mean, I have to say, from a personal perspective, I do think that this is changing. I think that there are more informal discussions. I'll be honest, I see the use in just personal conversations and team meetings of swear words more regularly than I would have 8 to 10 years ago. Now, whatever your personal views are on whether that's good or not, I think it's a more relaxed atmosphere where people feel comfortable just expressing the way that they feel, in true words. But is that something, guys, that we probably need to think about as well? Again, we talk about insurance. It comes across still as a very middle class, white male profession, and there's a lot that we all need to do to try to shrug that off to attract people from different social economic backgrounds into the industry. Joe, go to you first on that.
No, it's a really interesting question that's come through, because actually I've been speaking to one of our directors, and we've been having the conversation about language that we use and how does it resonate with the younger generation and younger people. And I think one of the directors said that they were getting lessons from their children on how we can actually say things that's meaningful to them, and we do get caught in an industry, and most industries do, we use a lot of jargon, and sometimes it's like looking at it and saying, okay, could we say things, again, in job adverts we put big words in, but actually let's call it out as it is, simple, straightforward. Who are we talking to make it resonate more?
I don't know if anyone saw this, but there was a really interesting thing on LinkedIn saying reality of situation, I've passed my driving test, and then the corporate announcement that would go out, and it was 8 lines saying, delighted to announce that I've gone through a heavy machinery operating procedure, that sort of thing. So I get completely, well, and Gary, you know, you're speaking to candidates regularly. Do they want us to talk in more simplistic terms and attract what they stand for to this industry, or actually do they need to understand that they're going into a professional environment and need to conform to that themselves?
Yeah, I think sometimes people seem to think that big words is there to hide the truth. From a recruitment viewpoint, you don't want to be tricking people into coming to work for you, because there's no longevity in that at all. And again, I think from making people feel like they are part of something, you've got to get things back down to bare basics. You know, as long as you're covering what you need to cover, you don't need to go down the corporate speak. It puts a lot of people off, puts a lot of customers off, actually. So if we want our staff to be approachable to customers, we need to be approachable to them in the same breath.
Yeah. I don't think you would necessarily, I'm just thinking of this, change your language or how you're speaking. I think we are who we are based on our experience and knowledge and people that we've met. I think the only thing, maybe from a rapport building, it might depend on the type of role and the type of person that you're looking to attract. Yeah. You know, you may think carefully who would be the right person to do the first interview with that person. I think if you try and change who you are and the language that you use, then you're not being yourself. That's just my person. I think I've got 3 of my 4 kids still live at home, and it's interesting some of the language they use, and it's like, wow, do you say that when I won't say what words, but you know, they do. But that wouldn't be inappropriate, I wouldn't see, in an interview situation. I think, you know, part of it, I think you said, it's a professional, you know, sector. You know, it's attracted a whole range of different people, but you can still be professional, but it's certain language that isn't appropriate to use.
Gary, can I ask you a question as well? Just a slight tangent, but sort of similar sort of subject. What percentage of insurance candidates that you guys place are men? Obviously, I know you won't know exactly, but just as a rough estimate. Well,
I wouldn't know. What I would say, the more, and it's well documented, the more senior you go up the tree, so to speak, a high percentage of men. I'm doing a Q&A leadership exercise, and it's a key, and you know, it's amazing the amount of leaders, it's well documented in the industry, are men. I think in certain areas, claims actually, Jess, isn't it? So claims management, some of the operational
pieces,
you know, they are the ones. Some of the recent ones, they're more female, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
But where more technical roles tend to be more male based.
Jess, do you think that puts female candidates off if there is a perception that this is a male-led industry, particularly at senior roles, that is something that they would therefore think, actually, I'm not sure if that's a career that I would want to move into?
So there's 2 schools of thought I find with the candidates that I talk to. Some see it as like a personal challenge to go in and, you know, show them, you know, I think, but it takes a certain personality. And then absolutely a lot of women that I speak to, they, especially when the kind of senior leadership is very male dominated and very male focused, actually, if you look at most other industries, if there's a balance, because women can bring to the table something slightly different to than what men can, and with a balance, it does tend to be a great kind of environment for people. And I think that it's probably the unbalance that puts people off. There's probably concern as to whether, you know, certain elements and ways of business, how it's kind of managed. I guess it's just very different sometimes how women and men manage different situations. But I think kind of touching on what Rob said earlier, which reminded me when you were saying about the younger kind of generations and the speaking, I think it's also listening to people. You can be professional, you don't need to change your language, you can be authentic, but it's actually listening to what it is that they're interested in, what they're looking for out the business as well, that can help you to better sell the business to them more accurately in what they're looking to do, I guess. And it's quite interesting because when you mentioned earlier about kind of you've noticed a change when you're talking to your team and things like that, I noticed from we originally were based in an office, now we've got kind of home working, speaking to people, candidates and clients alike, actually. A slight change in my everyday conversations with them. It's slightly more relaxed. It's a bit less corporate. It's a bit, and if the doorbell goes, the dog barks, there's not this stigma around it. People are a bit more relaxed about it. And actually, I found that having a slightly more relaxed conversation with people, you get more out of it. People build more rapport and you get to know somebody a bit better and you can better help them. So I think that's what I've personally found through kind of the lockdown scenario and working from home.
Yeah. We've got 5 minutes left. I've got one last question that I just want to ask you guys, really quick answers if possible. Joe, I'm going to come to you first. Is assessing candidates and their credentials more difficult now than perhaps it was traditionally? So we're talking about a new wave who have different interests, potentially different language skills, much more in tune with technology, perhaps not so great at traditional skills. They might not have as much of that, what we would consider traditional skills going back in business. Does that make assessing potential candidates more difficult than perhaps it once was, or is it just slightly different?
I think it's slightly different, and I think it's an interesting question because when you're doing that initial assessment, it's on paper. So actually you are reading a written language that somebody's written and somebody else is looking over it. So you're not getting that interaction when you talk. So for us, and again, sometimes I think that some people don't do the best on their CV, and having that initial call with them, actually you get a lot more from them to break down those barriers than just using the written content. So I do think it's changed, but for the better potentially in that way.
Gary, is that true? CVs can be misleading, particularly for young people. You need to speak with them and get to know them a bit more.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because people, there's different ways you can look at a CV, but you scan for certain things in terms of, are they, have got the right background skill to, I suppose, to want a discussion with them. But then it's amazing, Jess, isn't it? That amount of times you talk to someone and your perceptions are completely different than what they were before you spoke to them based on what you saw in a black and white CV.
Yeah.
It's odd, isn't it? Because the last thing as an individual that you would ever want to be judged by is what's written on a piece of paper about you. And yet we all do that when we're thinking about prospective candidates. You're much more likely to think, okay, this guy has done this role previously for one of our competitors, as opposed to assess their individual personality and think about the applicability. And I think you probably need to try to balance those bits up, right, Jess?
Yeah, no, absolutely, couldn't agree more. Like you guys said, once you can look at somebody on paper, but actually when you start to talk about, also it's really difficult to get, for different roles and different people, it's really difficult for them to narrow down exactly what it is that client's looking for on a CV. So by talking to them and taking the time to understand and ask the questions, knowing what the client wants and being able to articulate particular questions to them and get the answers, you get to know somebody so much better. And the amount of times that I've spoken to somebody and thought they're probably not right, and then afterwards thought, yeah, absolutely, I want to present them for a role. That would probably happen quite a lot of times, to be honest with you.
No, absolutely. Right, guys, I think, Julia, I don't know if you want to wrap up. We're done here. So thanks everyone for joining us and listening in. I hope you found that useful. I think it was a really interesting discussion point, actually. Lots of good stuff there. And thanks to everyone on the panel for joining us. So Julia, I'll hand back over to you now.
Thank you, Gary. It was a really good session, and it really is great to drill down into those areas that certainly of my generation, but even just, those that are fresh out of university, the difference in their expectations to what my generation and, slightly older than university graduates would expect is incredible, really. And actually probably can be drilled down into half a dozen points. So I thought that was really interesting from the session today. So the learning objectives today were delegates will be able to identify where we see most gaps as an industry, understand what we can do better as an industry to retain and attract talent, have an insight into what the future of employment could look like, and understand how to establish a culture of learning. So thank you so much to Innovation Group, and thank you to Gary and Jessica and Joe. It's very much appreciated. And
Rob as well, Julia. Well, thank you.
And Rob, I beg your pardon, and Rob. I'm sorry, Rob Angus, thank you very much. And to our delegates, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have a good afternoon. Thanks very much.